It was a night like any other, or so I thought. I was in my apartment, alone, with the only company of the full moon peeking through the window. Suddenly a sound interrupted the silence, a sharp, metallic thud from the basement. At first I ignored it, but then the sound was repeated. I decided to investigate. I descended the basement stairs, each step creaking under my feet, increasing the tension. The only light came from the dim bulb hanging from the ceiling, swinging back and forth. As I reached the bottom, I noticed something strange. A door I had never seen before. It was made of cold, worn metal with a small glass window at the top. Through it, all I could see was darkness. Intrigued, I decided to open the door. But when I turned the knob, a shiver ran down my spine. Something was not right. On the other side of the door, there was nothing but unfathomable darkness. But then, from that darkness, a sound emerged, a distant echo like a barely audible whisper. That was the beginning of my descent into a world of terror and mystery, a world that lurked just below my home, waiting to be discovered. And although I didn't know it at the time, that door was just the entrance to a labyrinth of shadows and dark secrets. After that first night, things began to change. The sounds from the basement became more frequent and increasingly strange. They were distant echoes, barely audible whispers that seemed to come from the darkness beyond the door. One night, I decided to record the sounds. Placing my phone by the door, I let the recorder run all night. The next morning, I listened to the recording. What I heard chilled me. They were voices, human voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. But there was something else, something that made me tremble with fear. Among the voices, I could hear my name. It was being spoken with a chilling slowness, as if they were savoring it. I decided to investigate further. I began to spend more time in the basement, trying to decipher the mysteries behind the door. But the more I investigated, the deeper I plunged into the mystery. The door seemed to have a kind of power over me. It drew me in, it called to me, and every time I approached it, I could feel a presence. Something was on the other side, waiting. And then, one night, it happened. While I was in the basement, the door opened on its own. A blast of cold air hit me, and for a moment I could see what was on the other side. It was a hallway, a long, dark hallway that stretched as far as the eye could see. And at the end of the hallway, there was a light. A faint, flickering light, like a candle in the dark. That was the last thing I remember. When I woke up, I was in my bed, as if nothing had happened. But I know what I saw, and I know something is waiting for me on the other side of that door. From that night on, my life became chaos. The sounds in the basement became louder, clearer. The voices were no longer just whispers, but full conversations. And always, always, my name echoed among them. I decided to explore the hallway. Armed with a flashlight and reckless determination, I walked through the door. The air was cold and damp, and a musty, earthy smell filled my lungs. The hallway stretched before me, dark and endless. I walked for what seemed like hours. The light from my flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, and every shadow seemed to move and twist around me. But I pressed on, guided by the voices that seemed to call from afar. Finally, I reached the end of the corridor. There, in the midst of the darkness, stood a figure. I could not see it clearly, but its presence was undeniable. She was staring at me, silently from the darkness. I tried to speak, to ask who it was, what it wanted. But before I could say a word, the figure raised a hand. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was back in my bed. But something had changed. In my hand, I found a small, cold object. It was an ancient key made of a dark, worn metal. I don't know what this key means or what secrets it holds. But I do know that something awaits me at the end of that corridor. Something dark and terrible. and I know that sooner or later I will have to face it. With the key in my hand, I was faced with a decision. Should I go forward, go deeper into the darkness and face the unknown, or should I turn back, close the door and forget everything I had experienced? But I knew I couldn't ignore it. The voices, the whispers, my name echoing in the darkness. Everything was leading me back to the hallway. So, with a sigh of resignation, I went back to the basement. The door was there, as imposing as ever. But now I had the key. With a tremor of anticipation, I inserted it into the lock. It turned with a dull click, and the door swung open. The hallway was as dark as ever, but now there was a difference. At the end, the flickering light was gone. In its place, there was a door. An old, worn door, similar to the one in my basement. I approached cautiously, each step echoing in the silence. When I reached the door, I saw that it had an inscription on it. It was in the same unfamiliar language as the voices, but one word was familiar: my name. With one last breath, I opened the door. What I saw on the other side, that is something I will never forget. But that's a story for another day, because though I've discovered so much, I know this is only the beginning. There are more secrets in the darkness, more echoes waiting to be heard. On the other side of the door, I found a room. It was an old and worn room, with stone walls and a dirt floor. In the center, there was a table. On the table, there was a book. The book was covered with dust and looked very old. I opened it carefully, fearing that it would fall apart in my hands. But despite its appearance, the pages were intact. They were pages full of writing in the same unknown language as the voices and the inscription on the door. But there was something else. Among the pages, I found a photograph. It was an old, faded photograph. It showed a man standing by the same door that was in my basement. The man looked strangely familiar, but I couldn't remember where I had seen him before. Suddenly, a thought struck me. The man in the photograph ... IT was me, but that couldn't be possible. The photograph was clearly old, decades old, maybe even a century old, but I couldn't deny the evidence. The man in the photograph was me, or at least someone who looked exactly like me. With my heart pounding, I went back to the door. I knew I had to find answers. I had to discover the truth about the door, the voices, and now, the photograph. With the photograph in my hand, I stared at the door that had appeared in my basement, the door that had led me to this place, and now, the door that was apparently connected to my past. I decided to explore further. I spent days in that room, reading the book, trying to decipher the unknown language. And with each page I turned, the story became stranger. The book spoke of a ritual, an ancient ritual that allowed people to travel through time and space. It spoke of a door, the same door that was in my basement, and it spoke of a price to be paid for using the door. But most disturbing of all, the book seemed to be written by me. My name was on the cover, and the handwriting was identical to mine. But I didn't remember writing any of it. It was clear that something strange was going on, something that was beyond the natural, beyond what I could understand. But I couldn't turn back. I had to move on. I had to find out the truth. And so with each passing day, I plunged deeper and deeper into darkness. But despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, I knew I had to keep going. Because at the end of the road, I hoped to find answers. After weeks of research, I finally discovered the truth. The door, the book, the photograph, everything was connected, and I, somehow, was at the center of it all. The book was a diary, my diary. It spoke of my experiments with the door, of my travels through time and space. But there was one detail that chilled me. According to the diary, I had created the gate, but that was not all. The diary also spoke of a danger, a danger that came from the darkness, something I had awakened during my experiments, something that was now free. With each page I read, the truth became clearer. I had unleashed something terrible, and now it was my responsibility to stop it. Armed with the knowledge of the journal, I returned to the door. I knew what I had to do. I had to go in. I had to face what I had unleashed. And so, with one last breath, I stepped through the door. What I found on the other side, that's something I'll never forget. But that's a story for another day. For though I have reached the end of this road, I know there is more to discover. More secrets in the darkness. More echoes waiting to be heard. And so, though my descent into darkness has come to an end, I know that my journey is far from over.